imperialism and Africa narrative. The Belt and Road Initiative is imperialism narratives. They got a lot of play in the DC think tank foreign policy sector for quite a while. But the new meta now is to actually recognize that Chinese loans offer far more favorable conditions than the IMF and the World Bank ever could. And there's a lot of loan forgiveness that comes along with it as well. And therefore, you have thinkers that write for, Foreign Policy Mag and stuff like that, that openly will say, we have to get better. We have to deliver better, more peaceful, and less interventionist loans than China is doing, than China is offering. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO summit in Tianjin is a key gathering for Iran after the U.S.-Israel war. Tehran is set to deepen its relationship with China in a way it hasn't before, moving beyond its past short-term crisis-driven outreach. This is SCO's largest summit since its 2001 founding. Over 20 countries plus at least 10 international bodies, including the UN Secretary General, are present. The scale reflects how China is filling the gaps left by Trump's disruption of the global order. For Iran, the timing is crucial. The E3, Germany, UK, France just triggered the snapback of UN sanctions. Iran is still reeling from the aftershocks of war with Israel and the US. Significantly at Tianjin, SCO leaders condemned the US and Israel attack on Iran in June. Foreign Minister Arakshi, alongside his Russian and Chinese counterparts, sent a joint letter to the UN rejecting the snapback. They argued it lacks legal basis and is politically destructive. For Tehran, this is a rare moment of visible backing from two global powers at a key moment. China and Russia join Iran in rejecting the European move to restore sanctions on Tehran. A letter from the Chinese, Russian, and Iranian foreign ministers called Britain, France, and Germany's move to restore sanctions via the snapback mechanism legally and procedurally flawed. What's interesting about this is that, yes, on the one hand, you got Russia making these sorts of statements, and you go, well, okay, you're Russia. You deserve the sanctions for your encroachments, your irredentist actions in Ukraine, your fucking war that you're waging in Ukraine. But on the other hand, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of Iranian leadership for a brief moment, you would kind of recognize that Western nations are doing that to Iran in an even more unjustifiable, with an even more unjustifiable reason when you consider it, additional sanctions and this aggressive enforcement that seeks to cripple the Iranian economy even further, to starve out the Iranian economy even further, is utterly ridiculous. Contrary to much of Western analysis, Iran hasn't decisively pivoted to China yet. It often abandoned Beijing for short-term openings with the U.S. and EU efforts Israel has successfully blocked. China, for its part, has long showed strategic mistrust of Iran. Even Xi Jinping's 2016 $40 billion offer for rail, refiner, and power plant investments was sidelined. Iran gave South Pars contracts to total over Chinese firms after the JCPOA. The 25-year roadmap proved symbolic for Iran. Beijing saw Tehran turn to it only in times of crisis. But Iran has always been unimaginably invested in maintaining sovereignty. Okay, I'm not making an assessment on whether this is good or bad. I'm just telling you that they've always chosen sovereignty and also leveraging the reverse relationship that they don't even have with Western powers against China with regular frequency. If you have all of these, if you have nations in Africa leveraging the pre-existing harm that they saw from Western powers to create an environment of cooperation with China, Iran, for some weird reason, has done the exact opposite, where time and time again, they have shown mistrust to China. Even when China is demonstrated that they have a strategic interest in cooperating with Iran as their own little bulwark against Western imperialism in the region. Russia is not irredentist, Lamau, just the irrational justification of Putin's dumbass gave for a rational invasion after they were left no choice thanks to NATO threatening to have nukes positioned at Kharkiv at a distance equivalent to Detroit to DC to Moscow. It is absolutely irredentist. If we know that there was never going to be NATO encroachment in Ukraine, you think Vladimir Putin miscalculated that? No, of course he didn't. There was already pre-existing instability in LPR and DPR, and they had already annexed Crimea. It is absolutely an additional push for more land. and more control over Ukraine. It's ridiculous. Come on, please stop. Now the Iranian calculus may be shifting. Iranian Defense Minister Nazirizadeh at the SCO. Orgs like Shanghai and BRICS can substitute unilateralism by forming new alliances. Regional security will be ensured with SCO cooperation. Iran is signaling readiness for deeper long-term cooperation with China. This stretches from Afghanistan to the Persian Gulf to Xinjiang and shaping the future of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Caucasus in the wake of the IMEC and the Trump corridor. I'm not saying this because I'm Turkish and I do often meme about Turkey being at the table, but a key component of this, or I guess like the last remaining castle for American imperialism in this region would be Turkey, because every single Turkic region that spans from China all the way to Europe is still very much aligned with Turkey here and get logistical training and supplies from the Turkish military. And therefore, Turkey being the NATO nation that it is a very important factor as far as like China having its own backyard and the entire Asian continent cleared of like American intervention, so they can do trade maxing to the best of their ability by rail and develop their supply lines in the way that they want to. Beijing-Tehran shared interests go beyond security. Beijing-Tehran ties can deepen to include more durable energy deals, oil, gas, renewables, major Chinese investment in Chabahar as a counter to U.S. corridors, and tech transfer in cutting-edge fields like AI. At the SCO summit, Pezeshkian welcomed China's call for reforming global governance. He backed SCO financial cooperation to cut dollar dependence, new rapid crisis response mechanisms, SCO Strategic Studies Center, Chabahar linking China, Central Asia, and the Indian Ocean. Iran sees the SCO's 10-year strategy as a chance to anchor itself in a multipolar order. Beijing's support in infrastructure and defense will hinge on Tehran showing long-term commitment and on how the U.S. and Europe will engage with Iran. China's invitation for Iran to its World War II Victory Day military parade while excluding Israel, the U.S. and EU, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE is telling. The message, Iran is part of Beijing's envisioned multipolar order. How we even ended up here is absurd. I think many people will say Trump is the reason for this. I think that's incorrect. I think Trump is simply the accelerant. Okay? That's
Despite a long-running...
I think Trump is simply the accelerant. Trump is giving the much needed push to all of these other periphery countries by behaving in this inconsistent and irrational manner. But overall, like, global designs such as this one do not exchange hands overnight. They don't, you can't turn the tide of history with one leadership over the next. It's not like this has been a long time coming. This is decades of sanctions and America basically turning China into the manufacturing hub of the entire planet. It's a long time. That gave China a tremendous political influence and power because it caused it basically made China intervention proof, because you can't destroy your own manufacturing hub.
I can read it in your messages, how frightened people are and how despairing they are. And I get it. Believe me, I get it. But the Trump administration's attempt to create a dictatorship here in the United States is not going very well. I mean, there are very public things we see. There are the ways in which the administration is trying to humiliate Americans by, for example, going into where the firefighters were fighting an active fire and demanding to see their IDs to make sure they were Americans, and then taking and arresting two of people who were allegedly undocumented immigrants who were fighting an active fire, and telling the people who said, can we say goodbye to them because we're like a family here, expletive off. We're gonna just do this. And there are many ways in which the administration is really trying to act as if it is Vladimir Putin's government in Russia, or the dictatorial government in any number of places in the world. But so far, Americans are pushing back really powerfully. And what's happening at the CDC is an example of that. And I'm going to say more about that going forward. But you've heard about the purges at the CDC, and there is pushback against them. And there is at least a suggestion that these changes aren't going to stand. So I'm going to go with that for a little bit because I want to emphasize what I was talking about the other day with the Trump administration. I talked about it on Tuesday, but it bears repeating because I feel like people are afraid of a paper tiger, as they say. That is, Trump and his administration, and I do not believe he is the one calling the shots here. I believe that Stephen Miller, the deputy uh, White House chief of staff, the person who is behind the massive deportations and is the absolute white nationalist, is behind them. And I believe Russell Vogt, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who was a key architect of Project 2025 and who has been decimating the US government in order to put in place a theocracy. Right now, it really looks like those two are the ones primarily calling the shots, which, just as a little bit of a side, is really interesting from a structural point of view. As I said to you months ago, power doesn't automatically vest in one spot or another. And there's been a lot of power sloshing around Washington, D.C. At first, it looked like Elon Musk was going to pick it up. It was pretty clear Trump didn't have a lot of it. Now it looks like Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt are the ones who are trying to grab hold of that power. But they are vulnerable because neither one of them is in an elected office. Neither one of them has their own power base, and they are dependent on President Donald Trump, who is himself a really loose cannon. So, and I've explained to you before what a loose cannon is. It's from the old days of warfare at sea, of naval warfare, when the cannons were chained to the deck because of the recoils. And if the chains snapped during that recoil of the cannon shooting off its cannonball, that cannon would ricochet around the internal pieces of the ship and destroy everything. This would just be an incredibly heavy piece of iron smashing around on everything. And so when you say somebody is a loose cannon, it really has this meaning of really being randomly destructive. And I think that really works in this case. But Trump is not in good shape. If you watch anything he does, he is very clearly a loose cannon. They are having to stroke his ego all the time. He is increasingly doubling down on the idea of sort of being a real estate mogul in Washington. There are many things that he is, as an individual, appears to be unable to handle in the White House, and instead is sort of ending up in a bubble that people are feeding in order to put in place an authoritarian government. And one of the things that I am not the only one watching very closely, but that I am watching very closely, are the ways in which the administration is trying to deploy the military. So you're seeing it in Washington, D.C., for example, but you are seeing it there picking up trash, for example, or mulching the trees in the tidal basin near the Jefferson Memorial, or near the Martin Luther King Jr. statue. And there is a sense that those military personnel are there to demonstrate that Trump and the MAGA Republicans control the Capitol. Now, remember, Congress is not currently in session. So you've got the president stamping control on the federal government. And yesterday, the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, announced that the United States government would also take over Union Station. And Union Station is where the trains come and go, and where the metro trains run from. And it's also where the veterans have been protesting the Trump administration. The guy who burned a flag, he is part of the protests near Union Station. Just as an aside here, one of the best cup of coffees I've ever had was in Union Station last year. So if you're in the area, you might want to check it out. But anyway, um, that takeover of Union Station is important because that will control how people get into and get out of the city on the metro lines. And if you've noticed today, the Trump administration has made noises about taking over South Station in Boston.